Okay, Cal, let's hear a little bit about your background now. Where were you born and your first musical influences in that?
Oh, gee, Max, it's ancient history. I just had my big 5-0 last July, which is another story. But I was born in St. Louis in 1925, and my early childhood was geared around vaudeville. And my father was a tap dancer, and my mother was a pianist, and they went on the road for a while, and they moved out to San Mateo, California in 1927, I think. And they opened up a dancing school there, and I was around. That was during the period when the tap dancing, the buck and wing, and the time step was very popular. Everybody sent his kid to the Saturday morning dance class, you know, for acrobatics and ballet, and so I was around that environment, and I started tap dancing when I was about 4 or 5, and then my first real, I remember, interest in jazz music was maybe when I was in 7th or 8th grade at St. Matthew's Grammar School there in San Mateo. And like all the kids, we were listening to Count Basie, Benny Goodman, and Tommy Dorsey, Glenn Miller, all the bands, and some of the small groups like the Benny Goodman Trios and Quartet. And so I took up drums in about the 8th grade.
I understand that there was a nationwide drumming.
Oh, the Gene Krupa, yeah, the Gene Krupa contest. I won it in San Francisco in the area, and then the next week some guy from Fresno beat me out, and I was very depressed. And just incidentally, that was a wild day because December the 7th, everybody remembers naturally as Pearl Harbor Day.
1941.
41, right? And I was about 16, I guess, and so. It was a double whammy for me because after losing to this guy from Fresno, come home and find that the Japs had attacked Pearl Harbor. And anyway, so I played drums in high school with a little Dixieland band, and there was a piano player named Merv Griffin with our band.
No kidding.
Yeah, we went through school together, and we'd play the old Dixieland arrangements like South and old 6- or 7-piece band. And then, of course, I was also thinking about going in the service. Everybody was then, you know, hoping that we could get in fast because that was a period where the gung-ho thing was very strong. And so I enlisted in the Navy when I was 17, spent almost 3 years in the Navy. Didn't play at all because I was in the Pacific, I told you once before.
Yeah.
And so...
I understand you won some medals over there too, Ken.
Well, no, I didn't. Not any personal medals or anything.
No, I mean
a couple of guys in my outfit were wounded. And
but the outfit itself...
Oh yeah, we got
on the invasion.
A commendation, yeah, afterwards. After the war was over, we got the letter. I guess they wanted everybody to keep active in the Naval Reserve or something. No, I'm just being facetious, but anyway, you know, we were in 5 invasions, and I was a medical corpsman with the Marines sometimes and with the Army, like in the Philippines at Leyte and Luzon. And then I got out of the Navy in March of '46, and then I went to San Jose State, started there in the summer, and then I started taking private drum lessons from the timpanist in the San Francisco Symphony. And during that time, Merv Griffin knew somebody at a radio station in San Francisco who had an old set of vibes, and I had been listening to Lionel Hampton all during those years. You know, he was my favorite vibe player. So I started. I had a little piano background as a kid, so it wasn't really that tough. I knew some of the scales and things, and I really started playing by ear. And I just remember that my first so-called break, you might say, or to get any recognition, was with Brubeck in the
Dave Brubeck?
In 1947.
You and him, he and Paul Desmond were
right.
College there, right? Was it San Jose?
No, Paul was going to San Francisco State, and so was I, and Jerome Richardson, flute player, and Brubeck was studying at Mills College across the bay with the French composer Darius Milhaud, studying composition and arranging, and so Brubeck had an octet that we just rehearsed every Saturdays. And they made an old album, or it's an old album now, about 1949 or 50 with the octet.
What's the name of that album?
It's just called the Dave Brubeck Octet, and I see it's out of print. I don't even think that they have any copies around. But then during that time, I was working around San Francisco, mostly on drums and just doubling a little bit on vibes. But my first, after I left Brubeck in '51, we were in Honolulu, and I wanted to go back to school and get some more credits for a teaching credential. I was just to have as an ace in the hole. I knew I wasn't really going to go into teaching. I wanted to play. One thing happened that was really exciting. About a year before that, 1948 or 49, Lionel Hampton came to town and offered me a job to go on the road as a second drummer and to back his band up. He was going to use 2 drummers. But I was right in the middle of school, and but the compliment was more important than anything else.
Okay, Cal, what about this Lionel Hampton thing now?
Well, I was in school. I was about a junior at San Francisco State, and Hampton was playing a gig at some club. I can't remember the name of it. And I asked him, or somebody had said, all right for me to sit in. And he, of course, that's like, at that time, Hampton, I could hardly even speak because he was such an idol from all the grammar school and high school days. And so he offered me a job for, I think, $125 a week at that time, which was great money. I mean, this is 1947, 48. And I thought about it, but again, I'm repeating myself. I thought, geez, if I go on the road now, and I'll probably never come back and finish up school. So, but again, the main thing about it was, geez, he asked me to join the band, which was, I'd wake up in the night and say, wow, did that really happen?
Okay, Cal, you left Brubeck to join George Shearing. Do you remember that day that you joined?
I sure do. I was working a little club in Market Street in San Francisco. And the intermission, a call came from John Levy, the manager. He was then manager of Shearing. And he were in Chicago somewhere, and he said, you want to join the band? And I said, well, at that time, Shearing was really hot, probably the hottest #1 jazz group in the country. That's what he had. Well, Margie Himes and Chuck Wayne, and John Levy was playing bass, Denzel Best on drums. And I said, of course, And he says, all right, I'll send you a letter or a telegram of confirmation. And I joined Shearing in January of, I guess it was 53. Stayed with him. That's where I first met Al McKibben and Toots Tillmans, the Belgian guitarist and harmonica player, was on the band. And geez, that was really a beautiful, beautiful experience for a year and a half. It's really a short time. But we traveled. It was my first trip to New York with Shearing. And without going too fast, when we were playing, it was either the Bandbox or Birdland. I can't remember. I think it was the Bandbox, right next to the old Birdland on 52nd. Al McKibben said, now you see, up until this time, Max, the only Latin bands I heard of were Prez Prado, maybe in a couple of local groups around there, and I liked it, but I think it was on the same night that on the intermission we went up to the Palladium, a couple of blocks, and Tito Puente was on the bill, and so was Machito. And of course, that fractured me. It just knocked me right off the chair.
Well, when you heard the vibes,
well, no, when I heard the things that they were doing, I'd never heard anything like that before. When it was jazz-oriented, the players taking kind of jazz solos and the rhythms. I wasn't really aware of what the hell a mambo was. I used to call them rumbas. When I grew up, and then of course during that period I really got hooked on Puente, and when I went back to L.A. and told George I wanted to stick around town, because during that time, I forgot to mention too, we had a boat, we sailed for about 3 or 4 years in Sausalito in San Francisco. And after a year on the road with Shearing, after playing St. Louis, Cleveland, Detroit, and Omaha, and in the heat of the summer, and with the terrible winters, I had really had it for a while. I just want to go back home and do some sailing. And I'd had this idea about a group, but now to back up just a minute, when we were in L.A. right before I left Shearing, I heard a group headed by Tony Martinez, and he had a little quintet with the vibes and congas, timbales, and bass, and they were doing some great things. I remember one of the first tunes I heard is like a mambo was My Secret Heart.
Remember I Can't?
No, I don't know. Yeah, is that an Eddie Cano tune?
Yeah, and it's fast.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
But I don't remember. I just remember this. They were doing a version. And then the dancing was really knocking me out too, because there were some people, I guess, who come from New York, some of the Puerto Rican, Cuban people that were doing like the mambo, that great. That I guess the last time I saw some really great dancing was up at Corso when we were in town about 3 years ago. Anyway, so the whole thing knocked me out, and I had this idea of getting a Latin jazz group and doing some jazz tunes with a Latin rhythm section. And I went back and worked for a while with my own trio while I was rehearsing this Latin band. I worked with Vernon Alley, a local bass player, and Richard Wines, a jazz piano player. We all grew up together. And I remember telling these guys about it. Boy, you got to dig the mambo. This guy says, mambo? What's a mambo? And Richard says, that's not jazz, Tjader. He says, what are you doing with this Latin mambo jazz? So anyway, Vernon had a terrible time. He couldn't play the bass lines, which are very natural for some of the Latin guys, and now the jazz guys have finally picked up over the years. But he was so used to playing on one every beat that he couldn't get himself into playing that one ding 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 ding. He couldn't get it. And he still laughs about it. I saw him a while back. He says, that's one thing I could never really get. But I went around to a couple of clubs and played, I forgot to say, we recorded that first album while I was still with Shearing with Eddie Cano, Armando Peraza, Afro-Cuban, the 10-inch album. That's the first one I did down there in L.A.
Is that what you want on there?
No, that was the one. Eddie had several tunes on there. Remo Caliente.
Oh, yes.
And then Mambo In. And then a couple of Eddie's tunes, and then some rhythm things.
Right.
And that was just about the time they were changing from 10-inch albums to the 12-inch albums.
I have the 10-inch.
And so to finish up the date we did in L.A. with Armando and McKibben and Eddie Cano, we got Jerome Richardson in San Francisco to do a couple of things, and Richard Wines on piano, Mambo Moderno and Mueve la Cintura. And that made the album, the 12-inch album. And then they called that Remo Caliente first.
Cal, let me go back a bit. With George Shearing, I noticed your name on some of his albums when he was recording on MGM.
Yeah.
Tiempo de Sincero. Was that the first one that you did with him?
That was, I forget the conga drum. It could have been Candido, maybe. Yeah,
there was Candido on there.
Candido was on that, right. And I think we did that in New York, at one of the studios.
It doesn't say. You know, I have to say...
But Shearing became very infatuated with that music at the same time. And Al McKibben, who was with Dizzy Gillespie's band when Chano Pozo was on the band, was one of the first jazz guys to he could play really good, very good conga drums because Chano showed him all these beats. And so then after joining Shearing started to do, as a part of his library, some Latin, some mambo things, you know.
Mm-hmm. Cal, are you aware that you're the only Latin musician of Swedish and English descent
I was going to say
whose history is on the back of his LPs? You're the only one, and I've checked this out thoroughly, that gives credit to sidemen. You've printed their photos.
Yeah, we talked about that once.
And, in the next month's issue of Latin New York, Chapter 4 of the Latin Music Rivalries, I expound about Cal Tjader's Unselfish Net. You'll see it, Cal, and if you don't get it, I'll send it to you.
Great, I wish you would. But we talked about this once before.
Yes.
I can't understand, because I know that I grew up, at least growing up in the period, when you bought a jazz album or a record, you wanted to know who was on the band, who was playing, and what his history was. You know, it's only right.
Let me tell you what those Fantasy and Verve LPs have done now. Disc jockeys love that because there's the date, the names of the personnel who were on that date, and the story behind it in their background. Yeah. And that's a great help to a disc jockey when he wants to do a historical thing, you know?
Yeah, well, they've kind of gotten away from that, Max. For, I guess, in my case, and some people in my situation, I've done about 60 albums also, you know. That's
about 60 albums?
Yeah, right? And it's, I think that finally they just said, well, what else can you write at each album release, you know?
Well,
but then once in a while,
we
you have
appreciate
to
even
update.
The photos. You know why?
Yeah.
Because 25, 50 years from now, Cal Tjader is still going to be a very important factor in Latin jazz. And people would like to see that. You understand how you looked at that particular moment and where you were playing at. Things change, like the Beacon Theater. Somebody takes a photo of that. 50 years from now, they may have a new stage there now. And people would like to see how it looked back then in 1976. So it has a historical value.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. The only thing, again, in my situation, some of the albums that are coming out now, like I thought that there should be on the Primo album that that Charlie Palmieri and Puente arranged for me. That was the idea I told you about it, as a tribute to New York Latin composers.
They really dug that here.
Well,
they really loved that.
I thought they should have had something on the notes there to explain. Hold on.